I'm Cinder Niemela, and along with Charlotte Gilmano, welcome to the Inspired Wisdom Podcast. I believe the most powerful gifts you can give yourself is time to reflect on your talents and experience, and then have the wisdom to act with confidence and grace. This podcast is for entrepreneurs, leaders, and individuals who want to thrive in work and life. Your journey to being connected and inspired by the world around you starts right now. Hello, my guest today is Karsten Drath. Karsten is joining us from Heidelberg, Germany. My mission is to interview 100 people from 100 countries who are making a positive social impact. Karsten certainly matches this profile. Karsten is navigating the globe by bike to raise money for the resilience of young people. During our interview, Karsten will share with us how ZIS, a nonprofit organization, gives scholarships for study trips to young adults between 16 and 20. When Karsten was a teen, he received a scholarship to work on a whaling station in Iceland and study scientific whaling. 20 years later, Karsten rekindled his passion for the ZIS organization and combined it with his love of endurance sports. His goal is to circumnavigate the Earth by bike in 10 annual 3-week rides. In the show notes, I've included additional details with itineraries if you'd like to meet up with Karsten or contribute to his campaign. Karsten is a leadership coach and expert on resilience with an extensive 16-year career in international consulting and leadership. Karsten has a very special passion and commitment to learning. He's navigated his career through engineering, business, an executive MBA from the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago, and he's an executive coach and psychotherapist. Karsten has written several books and articles on the subject of coaching, resilience, and leadership. These books include Coaching and Its Roots, Resilience in Corporate Leadership, Resilient Leadership, and Rules of Success. In the show notes, you'll find his bio and links to any of the resources that he mentions during today's interview. Karsten, welcome to the call.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I contacted you about a year ago, and you were just about to embark on a long bike trip then. And now I think you're about to embark on a very similar trip. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. What I found is that purpose is a very important thing when you go through tough times. And so I really looked for things that really touch me deep inside and connect with me and give me energy. And I was thinking how to combine all this. On the one hand side, I do like sports, but I don't like to be away from the family too much. And then something occurred to me, and when I was a lot younger than now, I think it was when I was 16 or 17, I came across an organization who gives away study grants to young people. The study grant says you have to study a topic that you choose for yourself. You have to stay abroad for at least a month or longer. You're not allowed to take own money with you, and you have to travel alone. And all of that is pointed towards so that you are open and that you need to reach out to people and connect with people and really get to know them. One of my trips was about scientific whaling in Iceland, and the money that you get was at that time the equivalent of $300. So $300 is not much, right? There's no way in hell, even 30 years ago, to get to Iceland with $300. So you need to be creative. So I reached out to the embassy and asked them, can you take me on a ship to Iceland for no fare? And they said no. And then again, and then they said no. And then I kept on asking and eventually said, here's the number of our, I'm not sure what the right term is. It's like an ambassador, something like that. In the north of Germany. Call the guy. He has a place on the ship for you, and please never call us again. And so I was there in Iceland. And then the next step was that I was about to be deported because I was seen as a refugee. Can you believe that?
Oh, no. Why? Because you came on a ship?
Exactly. And I didn't have enough funds to afford the trip back, right?
Oh.
And so I was asked to stay on the ship. until I was able to prove that I have a legitimate interest to be there. And that's a good thing about this organization. It forces the students to prepare. Mm-hmm. And so I had an invitation letter from the Ministry of Fishery, but this was at home. And we remember 30 years ago, there was no email, there was no mobile phone. I was on this ship. And so my parents had to go to the post office to fax the document to Iceland, to the embassy. That was a big thing, right? And so eventually I was not deported, and I developed a relationship to an employee of the German embassy in Reykjavik in Iceland. And after that crisis has been over, I asked her, you know what? I read an article of the state president of Iceland about whaling. Do you think I could have an interview with her? And she looked at me like, I'm not quite sure what you have taken, but you should take less. But she smiled and said, you know what, I'll try. And I think 2 or 3 days later, if I recall correctly, I had the interview. And, I had an official interview with the state president of Iceland on the topic of scientific whaling. And for me, that was life-changing. You can actually turn a crisis around into something that you wouldn't have imagined to be possible at all. And I forgot all of that for many, many years. And it really dawned on me in the last couple of years how important these things had been for my development. And so I said, okay, here's my plan. I want to bike long distances. And with this, with the context that I have to companies, I want to raise money in order to be able to finance scholarships of this organization, which is called CIS, Z-I-S. And 2 years ago, I started my first trip from Heidelberg, where I live, to Verona in Italy. That was 1,000 kilometers, and I enjoyed that. That was great. And then last year, I did 2,500 kilometers from Heidelberg to the Mediterranean Sea in France, then over to Italy, and then back across the Alps. And so it was like a full circle tour. And with these 2 tours, I was able to raise the equivalent of $4,500. I'm sorry, $45,000.
Okay, that's better.
That's better, right? So with these 2 tours, I was able to raise the equivalent of $45,000, and that's translates into, I think, more than 70 scholarships that I could fund. And so I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And also from my resilience research, what I know is that having a plan, having something that you really want to achieve is really, really important. Over the years, I've gained the confidence to say, what I want to do within the next 8 years is to cycle around the world on a bike, 3 weeks every year. That's something that I can afford. Then next year start where you've stopped the last year. So this year I'm cycling to the Atlantic coast, to Lisboa in Portugal. And then the year after I will cycle from San Francisco to Denver, Colorado. And then from Denver via Chicago to New York City. And then on to Moscow and all the Asian routes. And that gives me goosebumps if I think about it. And it really intrigues me when I'm down, when things don't go right, when something is wrong with health or the family or with the business. I observe myself thinking about this trip and planning a little bit, and all of a sudden my mood gets better and I have more energy, and it's really inspirational for me.
That's an awesome story. Do you have other people joining you, or are you alone?
I'm alone. I'm very open for others to join me, but meanwhile, the distances that I travel is a bit, scaring people off. And also, I really like to be alone. I mean, it's not that I meet people along the way, but then we meet, we talk, we have lunch together, and then we part ways. Or I have, some friends that really come to where I am and cycle with me for a day or two. But the design is that you are alone because you are more open to other people, and you also experience the world in a different way.
I love it. I love it. Well, you mentioned your book, Resilient Leadership, and the work that you did, and I really love that book. And some of the reasons why I love the book is because you pack in a lot of research. The first half to me is a little bit like an annotated bibliography, but it's written in English. So you can draw the connections between understanding yourself and these other themes like beliefs and energy and how we deal with crisis and satisfaction and fulfillment, and what do they have to do with resilience. I just love that first part of the book where you talk about the research between 1921 and current and provide a lot of bibliography for it. And then in the second half, when you start that in the first half as well, is applying these concepts to developing resilience in yourself for a more fulfilling and joyful life. So what I'd like you to do is talk a little bit about what compelled you to write this book, because it was a lot of work.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, thank you, first of all. Before I became a coach and a psychotherapist, I was a manager, and I was running an organization of 200 people, and the regular stuff, a lot of change, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of conflicts and escalations, and at one point I was traveling like heavily, 8 flights a week, had different teams in different continents, and I loved it. And I had 2 baby girls born during that time. I did an executive MBA. I did triathlons, did an Ironman, and so I did all kinds of crazy things. And I was very driven by the need to prove others what I'm capable of. And that was rooted in a deep sense of uncertainty, which I didn't know at that time. I just did what I did, right?
Where was the uncertainty coming from?
I think it came back from childhood, really. That having that feeling of being uncertain if you're good enough, something like that. And for me, my way of coping with that was to translate that into working hard. I'm not very smart, but what I can do is I can work hard. And so that was my way of attacking things. And eventually I did the Ironman, and all of that. But it only was good for a minute, and then I was looking for the next target. And that resulted in a situation where at one fine day, I woke up and had lost a large degree of my hearing on one ear. That was very hard because it was absolutely uncertain if the hearing would come back. And you only notice that hearing is really important for you if you lose it. And I was taken off the field. So my doctor told me, you have to stay at home, no emails, no phone calls. And I was in charge of 200 people, and I felt very much in charge. And because I was so important, I also constructed everything so that I was the center of gravitation. And so I really feel absolutely uneasy about the entire situation, a total loss of control. And so that in hindsight, that was the first time in my life where I couldn't solve a problem with working harder and sleeping less. That was my standard approach. And then fast forward a couple of years, I had left the corporate world and decided to become a trained coach. And then again, a couple of years later, I really decided to change my career and to join Leadership Choices, which is the company I'm now one of the managing partners of. And I dedicated 1 year to say, because if I'm now going to have this career, and I'm a German engineer, which is by training, which is the stereotypical, I want it profound. I really want to know why and how things are connected. I said, I really want to learn this a bit better than just with a coaching training. And I decided to get trained and certified as a psychotherapist. So I went back to school for a year. And part of the training was a clinical internship where you're one of the counselors working in a clinic with real patients. And because of my already at that time gray hair, people thought I'm competent, which is a total mix-up of things. But they led me very close to the patients, and I talked to them, and I was very deeply humbled by the fact that they were just like me. I mean, I didn't see any major difference why they are there with anxiety disorder, depression, burnout, substance abuse, and I was on the counseling side. For me, this was really a timing thing. I had just changed things a bit earlier and maybe was a bit luckier. And then I came across this term resilience. And I recall it was an article in the Harvard Business Review by Daniel Coutu. And I was really struck and electrified because I really wanted to understand this. And so I started grinding my teeth into it. It was very lofty written. It wasn't really concrete what it is and what it's composed of. And then I started my engineering thing. And I really wanted to deconstruct the term. And I looked into the models that were there. And I only found models that were not wrong, but they were like from the 1950s. So they were right, but they were not including everything that we know today. So 10 years ago, I started researching and trying to find out what is in there, what else contributes, what kind of studies there are. And so I really took a very, very broad approach. And then I came up with the model of the spheres of resilience. And today this has evolved into the FIRE model, factors improving resilience effectiveness, trying to combine all levers that improve the effectiveness of our capability to cope with adversity in one model that is not exclusive. The intention is not to say this is better and true and all the others are wrong and not so good. The idea was really to say this is one framework and you can plug a lot of other things into it and it just still makes sense. So the idea was to be open in the design. And this was the reason, this was the reason for the book. And for me, when I write a book, it typically has there's two things that are there. One is the topic really interests me and I cannot really give a profound answer yet. Mm-hmm. And then I have a tendency to grind my teeth into this and to really come up with something which I find is good enough to really be impactful. And so the model has proven very stable in the latest version so my latest book, I've added one additional sphere of mental agility to it because I found that this was really missing in the original model. But for me, this still holds true. It's very open, very applicable. And if you work through these spheres, you really have a very good understanding of where you stand with your own level of resilience in life.
Oh, that's so interesting. So these protective factors of individual resilience, you call them the spheres of individual resilience. They're on page 36 of the book. Again, I highly recommend people get it if they are interested in this topic. Those factors that you had listed in the book were trustworthy relationships, role models, responsibility, realistic expectations, self-confidence, which I think is one of the first things to go when a person is in a situation where they're under stress. And then the last one that you had in the book was personality. Uh-huh. What is the additional one? Is that mental agility is the additional one?
Yeah, so if you look at the model of the spheres, mm-hmm. It really starts on the inside with personality. So the idea there is, obviously, resilience is something that you can learn, but the truth is also that the way our soul is structured, if you want, our behavior preferences are set. There's also a preference, behavior preferences that correlate with the higher ability to cope with stress or unforeseen events. Mm-hmm. So if people are familiar, for example, with the 5-factor model or with the theory of the big fives, if you think of the first 3 of them, NEO, neuroticism, extroversion, and openness for experiences, or originality, there's a high body or a large body of research that would suggest that low values for N, high values for E, and high values for O correlate with a high raw resilience. We call this raw resilience because this is nothing that we have acquired. This is something that we're not born with, but we come out of our adolescence with it. You know, it is part of our personality, really. And as a result, some people find it easier than others to cope with crisis. And then there's the other element of resilience, which really has to do with learning. So there's personality, then there's biography. So this is how we have processed our life and the events that life has, played to us and how have we dealt with it. That leaves us to attitude. So what is the real attitude that I have when the going gets tough? Am I going into victim mode? Am I going into shaper mode? What are typical patterns? What are beliefs that kick in that I have acquired in my childhood and that still play a role today? Then the next thing is, to a degree, you can see a human as a biological battery. So we charge up at night or when we rest, and then we use our energy, and some things take away energy, some other things give us energy. And how do I deal with my charging of my battery? How can I make sure that my energy lasts enough time and that I'm wise in using it? The next level is mind-body axis. So how do we take into account that our body influences our thoughts, our emotions, and how can I make use of that? So, for example, sleeping, exercising, nutrition, meditation, these kinds of things. Then the next layer is really about authentic relationships. So who is my personal supervisory board that I allow very close next to me, that I open up and make myself vulnerable to, even if I may not be able to be vulnerable to everybody else, but at least to those couple of people that I open up to and share my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions. And then the last one being purpose or meaning. So what really drives me? Why do I do all this? How is this connected to something that is larger than me, larger than my annual bonus plan? That was the first iteration, really. And then the last bit that I added was mental agility, which really has to do with the fact that things are changing, and there's no reason to believe that the speed of change will decrease anytime soon, and that we need to learn to deal with new normals, with changed paradigms, with changed environments, and that this is a skill that also can be trained. So this is really the model going forward.
Let's use a specific example. Let's say that we have a leader who is fairly high in the organization, has an executive role, but we always report to someone else. So they're reporting to someone else who is very demanding, constantly shifting priorities, maybe abusive in that they're on call 24/7. And this person is beginning to experience the signs of stress, whether it physically, emotionally, relationally. How would you go through this model, or would you go through this model for this person to begin to see a more positive way out?
Yeah. So you just really mentioned concrete cases. So it really depends at what point in time these people show up. But one particular case, so exactly the situation like you described, and this person was getting maybe 5 hours of sleep, was working on the weekends, severely overweight, and in essence, he had given up, in the sense of, I almost don't deserve to be healthy or fit or have enough sleep because I have this boss and I have this important role. And if you want to have that, you need to comply. So we worked on this belief, if that is really true. And slowly started with increasing the level of sleep and increasing the level of saying no, for example, of not working on the weekend. Because if you have somebody who is very demanding, oftentimes they are demanding but not silly. And sometimes it requires to say no, or to ask, do you really want me to be on a call on a Sunday? In order to see, if that is really something that is absolutely necessary, or if it's something that is optional because they don't have a life and they don't care. And it took some time, but eventually he got back to 8 hours of sleep. He got back to working only half a day on the weekends. He lost weight. He started sports again, and eventually his energy level rose. And with this, he could actually work on his behavior, because there were things that made his manager believe that he was not on top of things. And these were communication patterns. So we worked on, the next thing was, we worked on communication patterns. We worked on anticipation, or anticipating what are the drivers of this leader, and how can you feed this driver so that this person is content and is getting off your back, because he is actually concerned that you're not on top of your business, and that could make him look bad. So we work, but then we first needed to have this ability to actually change behavior. And if you're out of your resources, there is no capability left. And then we came to the next thing, which was really around purpose. So what is it that makes his job really work? He loves his job. I mean, that's a crazy thing. Even if the boss is totally dysfunctional, this individual absolutely loves his job, loves the people, loves the company, so absolutely loyal. And what do you need so that this is really filled with purpose despite a dysfunctional boss? And I'm not saying that this is easy, and I'm not saying that this works all the time, but he's now at a totally different place in his career and also in his private life. This for me is a nice example of the model in practice.
Yes, yeah, it absolutely is. You're taking care of the battery first. That's the battery that drives everything else.
That's the foundation. And especially when we talk about mental agility. So I often run workshops, and when we talk about mental agility, so the capability of adjusting to a new normal, that is something that is directly linked to your level of resources or your level of energy. If you're out of energy, how could you learn to be in a new industry? How can you learn to be self-employed, or how can you learn Mandarin or whatever? It's extremely hard, right? So the battery, it's a bit like the Maslow's pyramid of needs, just in a different context. You need to start at the bottom, and then you can climb up the ladder.
That's excellent. I think people often start with attitude. So I've got a boss who is being very demanding or difficult, or I'm in a situation that's difficult and demanding. And so I'm just going to change my attitude. I'm going to start in the middle. And it doesn't work. And then people get frustrated.
Yeah. Attitude plays a role. It plays a huge role. So my wife, for example, she also went through cancer, through breast cancer. That was 8 years ago. And we know from research that the more severe a disease is, or a situation is, the more important is the attitude, right? So in medicine, we know this through the placebo effect, right? Placebo effect means only that something works because you believe it works, because actually there's no active ingredient. And we know, again, from research that the placebo effect is higher if the treatment to a disease is very severe and has a lot of side effects, right? Like cancer, like chemotherapy or radiation. But if somebody in this situation comes to you and says, hey, I've read a book that says you need to work on your attitude, pal, so suck it up and get over it, just you need to think positive, that's obviously not helpful, right? So the art is, how do I actually influence my attitude? How do I get from, I call it victim mode or martyr mode, into shaper mode? And that is not meant to be ironical. It plays a role. I've been in victim mode when I got fired from Bombardier for 6 months, if not longer. I've written a book in victim mode, which is a horrible thing, because I'm feeling a little bit ashamed about the stuff that you wrote there. But the question is, how do you get out of it? The one thing that is really working beautifully to get out of that is gratitude. It is really interesting, and this is something that I practice with the people in my workshops. If you think about things that you're really grateful for that happened today or that are in your life, and these are the things that you have not achieved by yourself. They came to you through whatever you believe, through God or through fate or through luck, like your partner, your family, your job, your health, your education, all of that. And you then go back to complaining about life. People start laughing because they know they can complain about life, but they can't now. This is the real interesting thing. In our brain, gratitude is really a kind of an antidote that works actively against victim mode. It is not preventing it from happening, but it shortens the time that we are in victim mode. And there's also fundamental research done at the Penn State University, is that if you have this practice this gratitude on a regular basis over a period of 9 weeks, it has visible effects against the control group on your emotional stability over a period of 24 months. And this is something that doesn't cost you a penny. To a degree, gratitude is something that we practice when we are religious, but many people are not religious anymore, or it is not a resource for them anymore. So to a degree, we bring the elements of things, of traditions of wisdom back into the field through these interventions that have to do with resilience.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I really like that explanation. Rules of success. What is the link between this book, Resilient Leadership, and Rules of Success?
I've been thinking about what success really is. If I am successful, or if somebody else is successful, if my clients are successful. And I found that there is a superficial answer to that. And that has to do with the money that you have on your bank account, the size of your house and the size of your car, and who you're with, and which social, societal class you're interacting with. Then there's also other levels. So I first try to understand what success really is. So there's obviously an objective component to it, that there needs to be a certain degree of freedom, and that has to do with the availability of financial funds. But the interesting thing is that this is largely driven by the peer group that you choose for yourself. So for example, if you look at millionaires, a millionaire will always know a millionaire who has more millions. And a billionaire will always have somebody to look up to who has even more billions on his bank account. And the question is, what peer group that you choose yourself to compare with? And then there's the other element of success, and that has to do to which degree can you actually live your values, to which degree can you be true to what is really, really important to yourself. So this is the more subjective components of success. And then I looked into what makes successful careers. And I mean, one of the more traditional ways of research is to look at very successful companies or very successful people, be it employed managers or be it investors or be it entrepreneurs, and look at what made them successful. No big surprise. One of the situations that came up was that success looks very, very different from the outside than it looks from the inside. From the outside, we think, there's no wonder that Warren Buffett is the richest man in the world. He was destined to be like that. It was always kind of pre-written, and he had to be, and it was a straight thing. And then if you look into the biography of Warren Buffett, well, that's not quite the case. There were several situations in his life where he was facing failure, where he was facing adversity, right? And how did he deal with that? Or if you take other important or famous people like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, they all had this situation. So one key ingredient in the formula of success, next to your skills, your dedication, your willpower, your motivation, the fit, and the element of luck, is resilience. How do you deal with setbacks? So this was for me another way to convey the message of what really makes us live a life that we really want to live, as opposed to something that is kind of the leftovers that we think we deserve.
Yeah, that's a wonderful description. It's occurring to me, you started out by telling the story of going to Iceland and being inspired to research whaling, and how resourceful you were to get there, to interview the president, and that this resourcefulness has reawakened in you in the last few years. The time in between, from the time you were 17 and went to Iceland to the last few years when you've really gotten into coaching and understanding human emotions and what it means to be human, where was your resourcefulness in between?
That's a very good question. I certainly can recall one situation when I was working at Dell. I was the managing director of the consulting unit of Dell for EMEA. It's a great company. Michael Dell is a great human being, but I just felt that I was at the wrong spot. I really love working with people. As a consultant, I really want to understand what the client needs and try to tailor a solution to his or her needs. And Dell had a totally different understanding of what consulting is or should be. And so I really felt in the wrong place. But I was in charge of a team, which I had also partially built up. So there was an element of loyalty. And at that time, my resourcefulness was pretty low. I was away pretty much every week, the full week. I was in a different city. And I didn't enjoy what I did. And I got good money for it. So it was really like a golden cage. And I lived in this golden cage for 4 years. And I was really suffering. You know, I was smoking at that time. It wasn't a good space. But on the other hand, you know, you have this lifestyle. I have 4 kids, luckily, a wife, obviously, and you know, family and a dog and cars and all of that. And so you need the money to a certain degree, and you need the safety. And then to think about now change your career, start something where you are starting from zero, where you have no reputation, where there's no books or nothing. That was a big thing for me, really. And I remember the last year, my wife had a lot of counseling to do with me to help me through this period before I really was ready to jump. So that was a period where my resourcefulness was lower, but there were also other periods where I'm really grateful that for the most part of my corporate career, I really loved what I did because I'm driven by learning. Mm-hmm. So I started off as a cabinet maker, as a woodworker. I became an engineer to find out I'm a terrible engineer. I then became an MBA, then a manager, then a coach, then a psychotherapist. So all of that stuff it really drives me because I can learn. So as long as I can learn stuff, and it interests me, of course. I'm very happy where I am.
That's wonderful. What advice would you give someone who's listening who might be in the same place, just not feeling very inspired or fulfilled in their current role?
Yeah, I know precisely how that feels. So I think what is really, really important is to listen to the own inner voice. This inner voice, if you look in the Outlook calendars of many, many people, is so much pushed down or overtoned with the noise of every day and calls and weekend activity, so that there's no way that you can actually listen to what your inner voice is trying to tell you. So I would suggest to make space for that and really go onto a quest to find out what is it that really drives you. And that can take years. It's nothing that you find out over a weekend or, going for a walk and then you have it. And it takes turns. And then the next thing that comes up is a gazillion reasons why it will not work, why you can't jump, why it's impossible. And it's insane. And then you have friends that will tell you exactly the same because they have their own fears why they are not jumping and why they limit themselves to the life that they think they are entitled to and not more. So there's all these people that say, no, you can't do it. And I think it is good to have these voices, but then also let them sit aside and hear on your own inner voice and see. Sometimes you can turn things around where you are and you just change the way of how you do things. This is definitely possible. I've seen it many, many times. So it is not always required to change something in the outside. Sometimes it's the right thing to change something on the inside. And then keep it up and continue until you really found something that you think really, makes your heart sing, or that really, where you get a different energy than just of the energy of, I reached my target, I get my bonus, and but really something that touches you inside. Yeah, it's a process, but it's a process that's very much worthwhile.
Yes, it's reminding me of the story that you have in the book of Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
It was early on, and he talks about this insight that he got. It kind of seemed like a flash of insight.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
it was about meaning and purpose, and he started imagining himself giving lectures at schools on the
Mm-hmm.
psychology of surviving in a prisoner of war camp. That's what you're saying, is find that thing within you, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
doing research on whales or whatever it is. And often it is, if we look to our way past and what we were interested in when we were younger. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and to then begin to imagine it. And at first, I think perhaps the cynic can say, well, you're just creating this artificial world that you're stepping into. The reality is you're in this prisoner of war camp and you're starving to death and you're being worked, and death is going to face you at any moment. But it goes back to your model and working with what you have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cindy. Do I choose to be driven by fear,
Mm-hmm.
or do I choose to be driven by what's possible, or opportunity, or growth, or trying to become a better version of myself? And I think that is the fundamental decision. Is it because I can't have anything else and I maybe don't even deserve anything better? Or is it because I can actually choose and I can create or co-create what I want to have as a life for myself? And you can believe in either of the two paradigms and you will find a lot of evidence for both, right? Nobody can prove that this really works. But if you start to working from this paradigm of opportunity and growth and possibility, all of a sudden things happen that are not normal. So for example, when you do this, going back to this organization I'm raising money for, there is a fixed term which is called the cis fortune. So that happens to people, the young people that travel. And, in the moment of biggest desperation, when somebody had stolen their luggage or they try to reach somebody and this person isn't there, all of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody comes and, holds up their hand and say, can I help you? The doors open up and then things change. And almost everybody who really went on a leap of faith with this trip, with something that was a bit risky, they report that all of a sudden, once you believe that this could work, all of a sudden doors opened up, and maybe not exactly that worked out, but something very, very close or even better. That's what I mean with this.
Oh, that's reminding me of something that happened to me. I spent a year and a half living in England and Spain on my own, took a year and a half off from college. And then when I ran out of money, I still had my plane ticket, and I'm sitting at JFK. I don't know anyone anymore who lives in New York. My father's even moved to Dallas, wondering what I'm going to do next, but not afraid. And I looked up and my father walks by.
No way.
Yeah. It still gives me chills.
Wow.
Yes. When you're on your path, when you give up control, needing to control the situation, but the answer is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I haven't thought of that in a while.
That's a great story, actually.
I know my father, for a long time, he would tell that story and he'd say, what were you thinking? What were you going to do? And I said, I don't know, Dad. I just trusted that it was going to work out. And I honestly, when I think about it, I don't know how long I was there. I don't think it was a day. It wasn't 24 hours. It wasn't very long.
Yeah, I have similar situation. So when I was in Iceland, I lived on a camping ground to save money. And I met a Swiss guy, Joseph was his name. And he came to Iceland every year for half a year. And he walked the island and he pushed a yellow bicycle. He really pushed it across the island with all his luggage. And he was very famous kind of because he was the first one, first tourist to come and the last one to leave. And I had lost track of his address. And so I really wanted to find the guy. And I remembered tiny little things, but I didn't have the address. So I went to Switzerland and I hiked through different villages where I thought this guy lived and showed around the pictures, and nobody knew him. And then I was there with my girlfriend. It was her birthday. It was in April and was snowing still, and we were in a tent. So we were crazy and young, or I was crazy. And then she said, you know what, it's my birthday today. We don't do this hiking thing, searching for Joseph. I just want to have a nice little walk at this river here. So we went alongside the river, and it was raining. It wasn't a nice day. And there was only one guy in the distance. And I said, just to be safe, I want to, approach the guy. And I approached him, and it was Joseph.
Oh my God.
And he had never been there. He had just felt the strong need to come to this place and walk this river, and so we met.
Mm-hmm.
So,
talk about energy.
Absolutely.
I love stories like that. Maybe that will be one of your future books.
Maybe, yeah.
I love stories like that. Part of the reason why I'm interviewing people from different countries is because we are so similar. There are so many similarities, and I love to hear the stories and that approaches that you take. You hear about American politics. What are your perceptions of the wall? How can you help us understand what's going on here from your perspective in Germany?
Okay, well, we certainly have some experiences with walls,
Yes, you do.
That's a difficult question. How do I answer that? In my last book, which is called The Resilient Organization and is only available in German, I asked myself, so how do systems become resilient? Mm-hmm. And what I mean for this, how does a society or an organization or a company maintains two elements? One is adaptability and the other one is robustness. And also the capability to anticipate what's coming towards you and what actually contributes to this. And part of what I did as part of that is that I developed a model how systems can be categorized based on their primary motives. And so their primary motives, for example, and this is work that is nothing that I have come up with. This is going back to Don Beck, Ken Wilber, Claire Graves, Patrick Laloux. So this is around what is it deep inside you or deep inside a system that is really determining why it is there, what's the right to exist. So I think there's a particularity in the US society where there's different elements in the society that work on different primary motives. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the tension and the rupture, I always would say, in the US society that is showing that on the one hand side, there is a part of the society that is really postmodern in the sense like we want to have an equilibrium between performance and profit on the one hand side and values on the other hand side. And this is taking care of world peace, being out there, being in union with other countries. And then there's the other element of the US society who's still stuck in the modern paradigm, which is about me first, winning against the others, winners and losers, about having isolated success as opposed to integrated success. And I think two paradigms, the gap between the two that needs to be bridged. So I see it more as a symptom. The wall is certainly not the root cause or the root problem. It is a symptom of a deep gap. I mean, we have the same gap in Germany. We have nobody who wants to build another wall. But we have people who want to say, who want all refugees to go home, or all people that are not German to go home, and that we are not part of the European Union anymore. So we have the same tendencies, just with different symptoms. And I think what wants to happen there is the healing of the fear that is underneath that, the fear of these people who want to win at all costs because they actually are fearing that they will be the losers in the game. So if this is no longer a win or lose game, maybe then it can heal. That's a long answer. I'm not quite sure if that's what you wanted to hear, but that's my thinking around it.
Oh, thank you for that. It's very helpful to hear an objective and really thoughtful response to that. And it does remind me of the pages in your book, Resilient Leadership, that talks about polarities and how resilient leaders are able to lead through polarities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just highly recommend that people get this book, Resilient Leadership. Karsten, I will include in the show notes how to get a hold of you. What is the best way for people to get hold of you if they want to talk more about anything that you've discussed today?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn and just send me a note and I'll be sure in getting back to you.
Great. And I'll include that. My last question for you is, what's one thing that you know now you wish you knew earlier?
Oh my gosh, Cinder, you have these good questions. I think it has to do with being a good dad. So at one point in my life, I got divorced from my first wife and I left my family. I think at that point, the notion of not being good enough also translated into not being a good enough dad because I left my kids or destroyed the family or whatever. And now we have a wonderful relationship, my daughters and I. It's a different relationship than to my ex-wife, to their mother. Both relationships are equally good though, and we also have a good adult relationship about being parents. So I think that would have helped me to be a bit less fearful or feel bad about following my heart and being assured that it's still possible to be a good father, a good dad that is really caring and loving, even though you're not physically present and that you are living in a different town and all of that.
That is a great one. And that's what I hear a lot of people say, that they're coming to coaching because they realize they want to be a good dad or a good mom. They're concerned about their children. I appreciate that. I think that's going to resonate for a lot of people as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it, Cinder. Thank you very much.
I'm Cinder Niemela,
Oh, you're so welcome.
You've been listening to the Inspired Wisdom Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We hope these conversations illuminate your path to your highest potential. For show notes and links to resources mentioned during today's episode, please go to inspiredwisdom.us. You can also follow Inspired Wisdom on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, design a fulfilling and prosperous life that engages your talents and passions.